Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Transgender Show. I'm your host, Emily. Tonight, I'm very excited to welcome to the show our first rock star, Venus DeMars. Venus is a multidisciplinary artist and musician, best known as a singer-songwriter, rock star, and leader of the glam-punk trans band Venus DeMars and All the Pretty Horses. Venus came out as transgender in 1988, a time when identifying as trans meant being classified as having a mental perversion and living as an outcast. Her refusal to live a shadow existence, instead embracing her uniqueness, complicated her musical and artistic career paths. She is now mid-process and writing a memoir reflecting her 30-year trans journey in this fast-changing, trans-embracing-backlashing world where we now find ourselves. Venus and her spouse are both memoir authors and the subject of the award-winning 2004 rock documentary Venus of Mars by Emily Goldberg. Everyone, welcome to the show. Venus. Hello.
Hi.
You made it. It's great to have you on. No more technical difficulties. Let's hope, at least for the time being. She's having some charging issues with the computer, so she might give me the heads up at some point that we're dying and we're going to take a break and see what juice we can get back into the computer.
I'm on battery only, and slowly. So we'll see how far it goes, and then I'll try to figure something else out, and then jump back in.
Perfect.
So
we do what we can here. Let's just jump right into it then and keep it going fast. My favorite question to start with is, how did you choose your name?
I have the actual date when I did, and it was in early mid-90s, maybe early mid-90s. And we were on tour with my lineup at that time, and we stopped at a I don't know what, wayside rest somewhere, and we were all talking, and we started playing around with the idea that we should come up with more authentic sounding names, because our and this was before I actually came out. It's so hard to explain what it was like back then. There wasn't this push to have a name. There wasn't this push for pronouns. I was still trying to figure out how to find my empowerment, if that makes sense to you. I was out as trans, but there was this other element of empowerment that I was still working through. So we were basically coming up with stage names. But I had already been in a super underground club for trans people, when it was mostly trans women, at various stages of transition or holding patterns. And we all had our femme names that we were in the club, because nobody was supposed to know each other's names. It was that secret. Top secret. And but I was out, and I was kind of playing with my birth name, dead name, different ways to S. My dead name is Stephen. So I went through variations of that, finally settled on S. Grandell, which was my birth last name. And it just didn't feel right. So we came up with these stage names, and I chose Venus. My bass player chose Pandora, and we went after these mythical god type people. And but mine really felt like mine. It felt like my name. And I kept it, and people started referring to it, because I really didn't want to use my male name. I didn't want to use my the S or the abbreviation. I was done with all of that. But it's so interesting. This was not a conversation at all. Pronoun, name, dead name, all of that, nothing. There was nothing. So this is all just from inside me, knowing that it wasn't feeling right. But my spouse at the time was very supportive, but neither of us really understood. The DeMars came in after the documentary Venus of Mars, and it's a play on the word of Mars. D Milo is Venus of Milo. So it was kind of like I kind of adopted that and transitioned with that. So that was a later augmentation. And then when I legally changed everything and got it, changed my life really with that legality, then I put it all together. But I did take my last name and my spouse's last name and put them in as my middle name. So trying to preserve some of our history, our long history. We just celebrated our 39th wedding anniversary.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you came out in a time when, like, the term transgender, I don't think was even really circulating yet. I mean,
No.
transsexual was out there, transvestite, some of these terms.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of us these days, when we kind of come to terms with things, we learn about the term transgender and we go, oh, okay, what is that? We research it, and that's how we find out, oh yeah, this is me, this is what I should do. What was that like for you, kind of discovering that without having that to fall back on, or having that to be able to even do the research?
Oh,
And where did you start?
it was like treading water. I mean, I didn't. None of us knew. I knew that I. Okay, so there's so much. The idea of transitioning was impossible,
Hmm.
financially impossible. It just wasn't even in the realm. Nothing was covered. The only way, and it was so much money. There's no way any of us could have ever afforded it. And I'm talking like us. It was only the occasional people that I would see who were brave enough to be out as trans women that I would talk to. Few and far between. And you would have had to have a partner who had a lot of money and wanted to do that, and there was so much fetish around trans that it was very abusive in so many ways. A lot of people who were in relationships, they were not good relationships. It was mostly a financial agreement. It was just a very, very difficult world. And the term transgender was brand new, and it was just being played around with. There was different variations for explanation of transcending gender or transversing gender, so going from one to the other, or being above gender. So there was different interpretations of what the term meant.
Hmm.
I started using it and explaining. For me, it made sense that it was more of an umbrella term, because back in those days, I was involved a lot with the fetish world, and there were lots of different people in different stages
Hmm.
there expressing their gender identity. And for me, it made sense that it could be an umbrella term for all of us.
Yeah.
So that's the way I started using it and started to explain it. But I didn't get that from a book or from research, or it was just something that made sense to me.
Hmm.
And so that's how I explained it.
Yeah,
When
that's perfect. It's great that you got to that so early. That's exactly how I view it. You know, all of us under the greater trans or transgender umbrella, that we're all across the gender spectrum is essentially what it means for us. So back then, what were some of the biggest hurdles that you had? I mean, you had not a hurdle, a cliff that was something you could not even get over of gender transitioning. But what were some of the other things that you ran into on your daily life, and how have you noticed that shifting over the years?
Well, yes. Well, I stood out so dramatically when I would just go to the grocery store, or I would go out to dinner, or my spouse and I would travel, or go to a different city, or just anywhere. People would stare, and they would drop everything. They'd be rude about it. It was just like they were not trying to hide it
Hmm.
at all. So the attention was incredibly oppressive. just that curiosity. And I don't know if everybody was being mean, but they were just so damn curious,
Mhm.
that they were just rude about it, and they didn't realize it. And one of the things that, to go on with this, um, because I was out, and I was trying to change the world. I was trying to change the world for selfish reasons. I wanted to be more comfortable myself,
Mhm.
right? So I was on stage, and I was just trying to get people to understand who I was, and understand that this was not so crazy. And but yeah, so people would be really rude, and they would ask really obnoxious, invasive questions. But I found, instead of getting angry at people, which was, your instinct, I tried to answer them, and I would tell them, this is not a good question to ask other people, but I will answer it for you. And so I would answer those rude, obnoxious questions. And that was the way I thought maybe I could change things. If I could get people to understand, I felt strong enough to be able to deal with it. Um, Most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, I did feel that way. And when I felt that way, then I answered it, and I tried to get them to come over to my side, and to understand, and to be okay, and to cool down a little bit about it all. And it worked. It did work. And we there were a lot of people that became allies and supporters, and to this day. But that's kind of how it started.
Now, back then, you were either pre pre or during the big social media, not social media, but pop culture circus, those circus shows that were, Povich and Springer, that would
Oh God,
bring
yeah,
out
yeah.
trans folks, and there
Yep.
was always that, prostitution or fetish slant to those. Did that How did that affect you at that time? And did you see more of the rude stares and the questioning, or
I got invited on to be the guest
Okay.
on some of these things. Maury Povich, in fact, invited me. I turned him down when it was during the early days of the film, when the film came out. So I was getting known for that. And
Mm.
I got invited to be there. And one of the handlers for it, explaining it to me and the filmmaker, was like, "Oh, this is not going to be an ambush." I was like, I never heard that term. Ambush, what? And so that's what they did. They would bring people on, convince them that everything would be cool, and then they would ambush you with something you didn't expect, and then it would blow up.
Mhm.
So it was like, oh my God, I am not getting anywhere near this. Um, so yes, it fueled that negative attention. Of course it did. Of course it did. And even the place, I was on a local talk show, which is in the film, if you've seen the film, um, early on, trying to be part of a group and curiosity. And even them, when they were trying to do it in a sensitive way, they were still just messing up big time. It was a ridiculous world.
Mhm.
It was it was ridiculous.
Now, when you perform in leather and pretty scantily clad, and
Yeah,
it's very bold.
yeah.
I wonder if some of that comes from the fact that you lived your life with so much of the focus on you, and people kind of looking at you and treating you sort of as a freak. Did that kind of develop the persona of just like, well, you want a freak, here you go?
Yeah, yeah, kind of. So part of it also was that there was so many people, when they saw me, they thought I would be in drag. Okay, they
Mhm.
thought, oh, I'm putting it on as a shtick to be on stage, and then I just look like any dude wherever during the day. So when I started doing the topless with the pasties, um, that was to say, no, I'm 24/7. This is who I am. You're not seeing a costume I'm putting on. So that was a decided thing that I did, so that I wouldn't have to explain it They would just know. Um, and then back in that time, in the fetish world, trans women were commonly, almost exclusively, submissive, fetish type of roles in that world.
Mm-hmm.
I never wanted that, and so I gravitated to the dom perspective, where I had empowerment, I had strength. I'm 6 feet tall, and I put heels on. I'm it made me feel empowered, and so I took that role on, exactly for that, because we would go into the rock and roll clubs in the suburbs or wherever, and I get all these rock and roller assholes that would come up and give us all kinds of shit, and I'd be taller than them. you know and they were attracted to me, and they were still pissed at me, and they wanted to make fun of me, but I disarmed them completely, and they didn't know really how to do it. They lost their footing.
Uh-huh.
They couldn't criticize me, and that gave me power and strength. And so it just became an identity for me, and a persona that would help me be strong.
Right.
um, and then but yeah, um, I'd have my crashes, and I'd have my I can't do this anymore, and I would have all of that stuff happen too.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, that's why I gravitated to all of that look.
Was there a point through your transition where it shifted? Was it gradual, or was it a noticeable shift that happened kind of relatively suddenly, where the acceptance was there and it was just easier to be?
Not I kind of started noticing it when I toured with Laura Jane Grace. I mean, it took that long, and that, in my opinion, I mean, there's different arguments, but in my opinion, I think she was the one that started the international conversation of trans women, and being seen as human and regular people.
Mm-hmm.
I think she really had that advantage of doing that. So when she invited me to tour with her, um, I was still coming from the old world, and but these were all ages shows, and that's when I started noticing things were changing. The kids had no problem with me. And it was just the three of us at that time. So I would be running the merch table right after I performed. I'd run out to the merch table. So they were like, "What are you doing out here?" And they wanted to get photographs of me and pictures of me. And then their parents were with them, and their parents were like, "Wow, this is cool." And they wanted to talk to me, and they thought that was great. And that was a paradigm shift for me,
Mm-hmm.
because I had not experienced that kind of acceptance until that tour. And it was normal. That was something I could normally expect at a show. I would still get shit now and then,
Mm-hmm.
but so much less than I used to. So, yeah.
So when did you start to realize that transition was possible for trans people, and how did that change your perspective on your own journey?
So I started hormones way back in the early '90s. And I never did any augmentation. All my breasts are completely hormonally developed, but it was just that long. It just took that long. Um, so my body changed through the hormone, and I was on a very high dose because I didn't go through a doctor. I just kind of pushed my way in and
Mm-hmm.
convinced them I needed it, and self-advocated it. And I found a doctor who was sympathetic, and he put me in touch with a endocrinologist who also I convinced that I was for real. Their big issue was that I was married, they were worried about lawsuits and that kind of stuff. But
Interesting.
I got them, but there was no program, there's no protocol. They just gave me all kinds of um, estrogen, and it was a high level, no suppressants. Um, so my body changed through that over the years, and that was very comfortable, and it sustained me, and I felt good about myself. It wasn't until later when insurance started paying for surgery, when we finally won that, um, that idea and that possibility started to play in my head. And I started, and I was feeling my age, and I felt like I needed to make a decision. And since I had the opportunity um, with that coverage, I had a big, difficult discussion with my spouse, and that was new territory. But she had gotten used to me changing here and there, little by little, all along. Um, and I decided that's what I needed to do. And so that would have been, that is not that long ago. I am going on 4 years now
Hmm.
of full transition surgical. Um, So that's a recent thing. But like I was saying, my body had changed so radically from the extended decades use of very high estrogen level hormones with no suppressants. So that was good for me, and it served me for a long, long time.
You mentioned that, you and your wife went through this experience without a lot of, definitely not a lot of positive examples out there, and no roadmaps, really kind of no idea what this was, or what to do with it. How did you navigate that with her? What were some of the key things that you talked about in order to make this a possibility and still stay together?
It was rocky. It was rocky. We argued a lot. We cried a lot. Um, I, you know, I would become suicidal, and then it was like neither of us wanted that. Um, it was hard. It was very hard because neither of us had the support. My spouse had no support. Anybody that was there who understood that she was staying with me could not get their head around it.
Hmm.
Um, and it was we found our support network by happenstance over the time of staying together and powering through it. But she was on her own for a long, long time, dealing with me and dealing with ridicule and criticism from her friends. It was hard, and no, nothing. So we stumbled forward. We made lots of mistakes. We were the ones with the machetes clearing the forest,
Hmm.
and you don't make a clear straight path. It winds, and you're all over sometimes you're taking two paths around, and then you meet up later on. I mean, it was rough, and there was no smooth way to do it, but we did it. We
Hmm.
made it.
And looking
Um,
back, what were some of the key things that helped in your relationship, or some of the key conversations that really helped bring you back to the point of fighting through it together?
Lynette, my spouse, realized that if we split up, she would probably, she told me this, she would probably fall in love or get connected with somebody very similar to me. And so she started understanding that she was attracted to me and the energy that I was portraying. That was a revelation to her. She wasn't looking for a guy. She was looking for somebody like me. and even though we would argue and we would have all these problems, we realized we didn't really want to start over with anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't want to start from scratch and then find ourselves, either of us, at the same place that we were at right there, only with somebody else. And then imagine, well, how much farther could have we gotten if we had stayed together?
Mm-hmm.
Some of those real clear what if questions helped us. Love. We loved each other. There was no question. We did. And that got us through. That pulled us through.
That's a pretty that's a pretty amazing story, and I love that you were able to see that together and stick through it. And that revelation that she had, that there was something in that sort of balance of the masculine and feminine together, that was what she was attracted to. I think
Yeah.
I think that's a very hopeful message for a lot of folks out there watching who are looking to go into transitioning and not knowing, will I ever find love again?
Yeah. Yeah. And my wife, she's got a memoir coming out. It's going to come out in February, I think, where she writes about her time and all of that struggle that she had to try to navigate without any guidance. It's a rough book. It'll trigger people.
Mm-hmm.
But it is an honest book, and it is an authentic book. And I support it because it's a story that we need to know. We need to understand. This is our history. And I think there are people, spouses of trans women particularly, but also trans men, who are trying to figure out how to navigate changes, which are fundamentally very dramatic and core. And how do you manage that? And there's not a lot of discussion about that. And there should be. We should be talking about it.
Well, there's not a lot of discussion of how to navigate a relationship, in polite
Yeah.
society, much less, something where specifically how to deal with change, and then let alone a change of this sort of dramatic nature.
Yeah. Yeah.
How much of it do you feel in retrospect, the struggles that you had in navigating this and figuring through a lot of it was just the outside pressures, and sort of like, we all deal with a lot of internalized transphobia and, kind of self-hatred, whereas, I shouldn't be like this, all of these sort of things. And I'm sure that, your spouse had the same, Lynette had the same thing of like, I'm supposed to be like this, I'm supposed to be with this type of person. Was that a big thing for you, and like kind of realizing that how much of this is outside pressures that aren't real in our relationship versus the internal pressures?
Logically, I understood that. Emotionally, it would still eclipse my thoughts, and I would go into my spiral and my depression. But logic told me I needed to ignore those self-hatred dialogues that I would have, and eventually I would climb back out. And the stage helped.
Mm-hmm.
The stage, rock and roll, audience, music, art, all of that gave me empowerment. It gave me hope. It gave me my core.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that either of you kind of got to a place of sort of an epiphany and an acceptance and an understanding before the other one, and thus was able to help kind of pull the other one there?
Yeah, we would do that in different levels. I mean, one first and the other first. One of the things that happened when I first came out early on was that I happened to have a therapist there who, interestingly, had to call their therapy sessions with me off because he technically at that time would have been encouraged me to be mentally ill. So he couldn't help me anymore once I came out. But I believe he was part of the community, not trans community, but gay. But he couldn't tell me that because he would have been fired. Um, but we kind of knew, and he did everything he could to help me move into a world on my own, to find my own path. And one of the things he said before, he said, we have to stop now. But he didn't say I was wrong. He just said, I can't do it legally. But he said I could do anything. I could do anything I wanted. And then he listed it. And he was the one that said, you could transition. But it was unaffordable, as I said earlier. Mm-hmm. It was just out of the question. But the idea got in here. And so I started thinking that that's what I needed to do. So the first discussions when I came out with my spouse was, I need to do this. And I had to hear her say, I can't deal with that. I need you to slow down and be with me. And it was hard for me to hear, and it was devastating. But I got it. I understood, and I slowed down. And it worked. That worked. That kept us together for those early days, and we just did small steps forward. I did small steps, and then I would reach back, grab her hand, and she would come along. And the steps were small enough, and we had kind of an unspoken thing where she said, if it gets too much, I have to go. And I was like, okay. But because I went slow, and we went in small stages, that time never happened. It never happened.
And then, many years later, you decide that it's now viable for you to medically transition, however you want to say it, the completing your transition or whatever.
Yeah.
But what then changed again? Did you have to go back and sort of revisit some of these things, or was it at that point sort of a logical next step?
No, we had to discuss it. It was a big deal, and it was a scary thing. I felt like at that point, it was just like, there's no discussion. I have to do this. Mm-hmm. And my spouse felt like the rug had been pulled out from under her, because there wasn't I wasn't allowing a discussion. And that was hard. That was a hard conversation. But, she understood. And I apologized for being so abrupt. Mm-hmm. And we got through it, and she supported me, and we are on a new adventure. We have been on a new adventure. Again, we're always on an adventure.
Well, that's amazing that you've been able to go on that adventure together for so much of it, and really truly be together along it, and bring her along, make her feel comfortable, keep the conversations open, and find those areas where you can come back together and move forward as a team.
Yeah.
So let's jump over to some more of the performing for a little bit. What countries have you performed in?
Oh, well, I've been England, Spain, Amsterdam, all across America, New Zealand, twice in New Zealand. I think that's where I didn't get over to Asia. I didn't get farther into Europe. And no, a lot of the farther out ones were part of the film festival circuit when the film first came out, and then they wanted the band to perform, and so they would help get us out there. So that helped open some doors for us to get farther.
Well, and that sounds like sort of a ready-made crowd then, right? If it's for the documentary, they're kind of there to see you, so they're more accepting?
Yeah. Well, they're curious. They could still be rude. But yes, they were accepting. They wanted to know. and it was a new thing. That film was like one of the only ones out there about at the time. It was kind of cutting edge. It looks dated now. You can stream it on Amazon. You can search Venus of Mars, and you can stream it, watch it. It's definitely historical now. Pronouns are all over the place. Its terminology is all over the place. It is not PC at all, but it is historic, and it really happened, and that is the world it was.
And so you feel it portrayed you and your experience very well?
I think it did. Yeah, I think it did. One of the things that the filmmaker, that was at the very beginning of sensational films or reality TV. So it started filming in, let's see, it came out in 2004. It took about 3 years. So 2001, 2002, she started filming. So that was the world we're looking at. And that was at the very beginning of some of the reality TV show stuff. And she had the opportunity to jump into some big dramatic arguments that Lynette and I had with the band on the street in New York. She could have gotten the cameras right in our faces and all up in our business, but she didn't. And that was amazing to us. And it actually gained our trust. And so the film changed from that kind of sensational tell-all film to a really intimate film. Something that I don't think would have happened if she would have done that. Mm-hmm. So that is the flavor of the film. The memoir that I'm writing now and that Lynette has just finished and she's coming out, we tell much more of the backstory, the difficulty, all of those arguments, all that drama. Mm-hmm. That's in the memoirs. But the film was took a different path, and I appreciated that.
Well, that's great. That gave you the opportunity to tell the story and the harder stuff in your own words.
Right. Yeah, it did. Yeah. And I thought it's more balanced. And she got deeper. She got deeper into what things were going on with us than I think she could have otherwise. So.
And did she focus, when you say us, did she focus more on the band, or did she focus on the band and you and Lynette?
She focused a lot on our relationship ultimately. I think it originally started about the band. So the band became the spine of the film. That became the reason to do the film, and the background of the film. And then Jen Dean was my drummer at that time, the only other trans woman that was with me in rock and roll at that time. Her story is also featured in there, and that story was also pretty early on in her story and her time navigating who she was and how she wanted to be. And she's got some of the best lines, hands down, some of the best lines.
Well, I'm very interested to watch it now. I hope it's not too cringeworthy these days, but I look forward to checking that out.
Historic. Think of it as historic. It's a historical documentation.
Purely a time capsule. Michaela, I see that you've put a link in the chat to the documentary, and it got blocked out because, Twitch rules. If you want to, you can go ahead and whisper to one of the mods. I think, Inashira, I think you're the right one to send that to. So if y'all could chat over whispers and get that, that'd be awesome. So I would love to have that in chat, that people could go and check that out. So in the touring to promote it, and just basically in the touring that you've been to different countries, I know you haven't been to a ton, but a few different in Europe, and you made it to New Zealand. Did you notice anything stark in the level of acceptance of trans folks in any of those countries?
I thought I would at the time. One of the first trips Lynette and I took, and this is right before the band started, so this would have been early 90s, late 80s or very beginning of the 90s, maybe 91, 92, I think. We went to France in Europe because she wanted to travel, and it was a vacation. I thought, thinking about his the idea that France was so progressive with a lot of racial issues back in the early music days, I just thought, oh, this would be a piece of cake. This would be great. I can just be myself and go out there. Nope, not at all. Terribly oppressive, terribly depressing. It was very difficult, very unexpected, and very unaccepting. And that shocked me. It's a different world now. So I am talking about decades ago. But, decades ago is not that long ago.
Mm-hmm.
So we have made such a difference in a very short amount of time. But no, I didn't. I didn't find acceptance. I found acceptance in the small groups that wanted to see the music, were curious about us. We were rock and rollers. We were expected to be crazy, bizarre people anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a kind of acceptance. And then when people got to know us more one-on-one or over coffee or over the interviews or whatever in the clubs, then it changed a little bit more through interviews. In New Zealand, there was a TV show, an LGBTQ TV show, and I think it was actually LGB. I don't think the T was there yet, but it was a queer station, and they interviewed us, and of course they're coming from a perspective of trying to help highlight all of us. Mm-hmm. And so that was very supportive and very, very understanding and very, very empowering. But we got interviewed by the New Zealand version of 2020. 2020 was a news program back then. It was all over America, but then they had a segment that was dedicated to New Zealand. We got interviewed by them. They asked ridiculous questions. They meant well. No.
Do you feel more or less safe nowadays? We've got this whole kind of backlash happening. Like you started at such a rough time, and then it got better. From a certain perspective, it could look like it's getting worse again. How has that been for you?
I was just talking to my spouse, Lynette, over lunch today about exactly that. Because of this thing that happened in Idaho, where they arrested all of those white supremacists that were getting ready to shoot up a pride march just days ago. Back in the day when I was touring, my band was so protective. We all watched out for each other. We expected individual attacks. We expected that kind of harassment and dangerous situations, especially on the road, especially using the washroom, which is a whole nother discussion. And then from the audience who may not know us. So my band was always on edge and always ready to take on something. But luckily, it didn't manifest in that way. But it was very stressful, and I would hear about it from other people dealing with that. Now there's this organized way of trying to oppress and dehumanize the queer world, which is very frightening and very different. Mm-hmm. Is it worse? It's very different. I think the danger has remained the same, but it's manifesting differently now. But we are all together now too.
Mm-hmm.
We are all together.
We're organized as well.
Yes, it's amazing. So you could argue so many different ways with that. I think it has been, we have been on guard forever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we still are. But on individual basis, huge changes have happened and are happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, that the danger is ever present and is just sort of a constant in our lives, despite how society kind of changes, because there are still always those people, and it's just a matter of how and when and how they feel emboldened to approach, and what they feel emboldened to do.
Yeah.
It's a very, very interesting and just a very interesting perspective to hear.
Yeah.
So moving on to the memoir, then, why was it important for you to write that at this point in your life?
I didn't want everything that I experienced and lived through to just vanish. Really.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like it was on the verge of vanishing. I I came out so early. The industry wasn't there for me. Music industry, I mean. I couldn't get any help. I couldn't get assistance. I couldn't get a record label. I couldn't get anything. So I had to be independent, forced to be independent and underground, and went broke doing it, hugely in debt, um, and I just never was able to climb out of that. Um, I was thought I would, but now, I've been around a long time. It's not going to happen. Um, so I wanted to leave something. I wanted to say something. I still want to make a difference. I still want to change the world. I still want to help. I want to give back. That's why I'm doing it.
That's wonderful. I see we've got some questions coming in from the audience, and we will get to those after the break. Keep them coming in even through the break.
And while we're on break, I'm down to 30% on my battery. I am going to try to I don't know what's wrong with my computer, just a little bit too much information here, but I don't know what's wrong with my computer, but my charger is not charging. I'm going to turn off my monitors in front of me, and I am going to quickly go just to my laptop with a camera and set it up in a different location down here, and then I'll tune back in and we'll see if that works better.
Okay, awesome. And then you're still able to play us out from the end of the break here. So
I can do it right now.
Yeah,
I can do it now.
I've got one
with
more
the good
question for
sound.
you, and then we'll go to that. So
right.
as we wrap up this section, everybody stay tuned here on the live audience for the bonus content after the break. And if you're watching this on YouTube, we'll either have the bonus content here, or we'll have it someplace else you can get to it.
And this is a song. I'm going to do some promotions. This is Just Me. It's our new album that we just released. Right now, I'm still trying to get distribution worked out. You can get it in Bandcamp, so you can get it from the band Venus Tomorrow's Bandcamp. You'll find it, and it's available there. You can get it. So this is one song off the new album.
All right. Before you hop into that, can I ask you one last question to close this out?
Yep.
What are the key pieces of advice that you have to pass on to young or closeted trans folks out there?
Oh, man. Okay, that's two different groups of people. Let me think. If you're closeted, don't give up. Be yourself. You will find your way out of it. You will. Don't give up. That's the big advice. Even if it feels impossible, hang in there, find your path, and get out of it. And you will. And you will. For those of you who are out but dealing with the world that is not accepting, or peers who are not good with you, bullying, any of that kind of crap, it's hard. It's just damn hard. We have, that is our fate. But we will be stronger for it. And we will learn so much more because of it. We will become powerful because we survived. That's my advice. Survive.
Venus and Mars, thank you so much for coming on and sharing so much of your story, and look forward to this bit of song here as you play us out.
Okay. Justice, there's a hole in my flesh. Justice, just a hole. Just missed where my soul gets enmeshed, as if it were mine. Justice, there's a hole in my heart, and it bleeds all the time. We'll fix it with an old piece of twine, with stitches and wine. When there's distance across a lifetime, all we know is all we've lost. Then through a hardness, this crime of living, where pain determines our cost. Take this whole piece of hate, still fights to survive. Then kiss, though it's blind to its fate. We'll burn it alive. And when there's heartache, this prize of no place, it steals your breath as if you'd care. But where your sadness, it's not a kindness. This fate is all we have to share. Justice, there's a hole in my path, and I stumble all the time. I'll fix it from an old mound of dirt and careless design.